Hi, it's Dr. Howard Hurst here again, talking all things nutrition. In this session, we're going to look at good eating habits to try and put in place to help athletes. And these tips are good for both junior athletes and adults. Okay, so to start with, here are my top tips for healthy eating habits. Number one, don't skip meals. I think that's a pretty obvious one, but a lot of us are in a rush. We're rushing to college or rushing to work, and it's quite easy to forget to have breakfast, or if we're in a meeting, not have lunch. But by skipping those meals, we start to get hungry, and by getting hungry, we generally tend to gravitate to less healthy food options, and there's a lot of research around that now, and I'll show you a little bit more information on eating patterns in a while. Number two, try and adopt a food first approach. I'm not going to say don't take any supplements at all. They are useful. I think in certain situations they can be beneficial. So for certain populations, maybe vegans or people who are on restricted diets for some reason, for health reasons, then that may be appropriate. Additionally, if you're away exercising or training and you've got quite a journey to get home, then maybe a post-session snack or protein shake or something like that may be useful. But if you've only got a 10-20 minute drive to get home, then wait till you get home and then have some real foods. Number three, hydration. Try to stay hydrated as much as you can. And as a general rule of thumb, try to have 1 milliliter per kilocalories you consume per day. So if you're on a 2000 kilocalorie diet per day, then you should be aiming to have about 2 liters of water. One thing a lot of people forget is that metabolism produces quite a lot of water. So for every gram of carbohydrate that you consume, there's around 3 to 4 grams of water that are also stored with that as well. So you don't need to adopt an overly aggressive hydration strategy. So somewhere between 2 and 3 litres is generally sufficient. Number four, protein with each meal. And I've just discussed this in other talks that I've done. If you've not seen those, go and check out those videos on my YouTube channel. But ideally, you want to try and split your protein equally over the course of the day. Now, I always recommend try to adopt a 6-meal pattern. You can have more, but having 6 meals, so your breakfast, lunch, evening meal, and then a morning, afternoon, evening stroke, post-bed snack, I find that optimal, and that's worked for a lot of athletes that I work with. And within those meals, we want to try and be splitting our protein evenly. So you should be having around 20 grams, depending on each individual. Sometimes it may be a little bit higher, but try and have around a minimum of about 20 grams with each meal. Number five, don't fear fats. Okay, fats get a bad reputation, but they are required. They are a needed nutrient for us. They provide some insulation. They provide nutrients for steroid hormones. They're required for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins, etc. There's a whole host of reasons why we should be eating fats. The key thing is education, okay, and making sure we're eating those good fats, the polyunsaturated fats, the monounsaturated fats. And then cutting down on the less healthy saturated fats and trans fats. Number six, eating colour. Variety is the key. By eating in colour, having plenty variety of vegetables and fruits, that'll ensure that you get in a broad range of vitamins and minerals. And by doing that and having a balanced diet, you should really be hitting most of your vitamin and mineral requirements per day. The one exception to that rule, I would say, is vitamin D, depending on where in the world you're living. Certainly if you're living in the northern hemisphere, and certainly in Europe, where sun is or sun daylight hours is less, and particularly during those winter months, long dark evenings, then a daily vitamin D supplement may be beneficial. And I would have to say that of all the athletes, with all the athletes that I've worked with over the years, pretty much most of them have had relatively low vitamin D levels. Ideally, we want to be getting around 15 micrograms per day, but that's quite challenging to get that amount through food alone, because the primary source of vitamin D is via sunshine and exposure to the sun's rays. So if you do live in colder climates where staying outdoors or getting enough outdoor exposure is challenging, then maybe a daily supplement of around 1000 IUs may be beneficial. Additionally to that, if you do a lot of your training indoors, then again, a supplement may be beneficial to that. That goes on to number 7, supplement safely. As I've said already, I'm not going to say don't take supplements, but if you are going to take them, then you need to do your homework, okay? Look at what the evidence is. The vast majority of supplements that are available on the market have very little or not particularly credible evidence to support their use. There are some notable exceptions: protein, amino acids, caffeine, things like that. But the vast majority of supplements out there, there's not a huge of evidence to back up their claims. That said, if you are going to take them, my advice is to try and find supplements that have either Informed Sport or the Informed Choice logo on them, because that gives you a level of assurity that those have been batch tested. The difference between the logos, one is every batch is tested as it comes off the production line. The other one, they have blind monthly batch testing. Number 8, try and choose healthier treats. We're all human. We all like a treat every now and again. And again, I'm not going to say don't go and have a piece of cake, or if you're an adult, don't go and have the odd glass of wine or lager or whatever your tipple is. But do it sparingly. Do it as a treat. Don't make it a habit. Okay. Similarly with your snacking, a bar of chocolate every now and again is not going to do us any harm, but it shouldn't become a daily habit. So try to opt for healthier snacks, or nuts and seeds, or some hummus with some vegetable dips, fruit, carrot sticks, anything like that. Okay. And then the last one, number 9, is sleep. I think this is one of the most underrated tips or habits, should I say, for exercise, performance, and general good health. Again, going back to one of the points I made at the beginning of this slide, a lot of us have very busy lifestyles these days. We're rushing here and there from work to training. If you've got children, trying to get the kids to training. Therefore, our working day these days often gets pushed later into the evening, and we don't get as much sleep. But trying to get a good quality 7 to 9 hours sleep a night can be hugely beneficial on general health. Evidence shows that by having a good sleeping routine, that also has a knock-on effect on the hunger levels, and therefore the type of foods that we choose for. And it also is where a lot of the recovery occurs. A lot of our recovery occurs while we're resting overnight. So there's my top tips to general good healthy eating habits. Okay, so what are some of the challenges to good nutrition and good nutritional habits? Quite often, knowledge, understanding of foods and what's good and what's not good, and the cooking processes is a challenge. As a general rule of thumb, the rarer the better, because that tends to retain more of the nutrients in the food. However, there are exceptions, such as having pink chicken or pink pork and things like that. But generally, try to cook your food slightly on the rare side. Poor choices, again, and some of this again boils down to knowledge of around fat-free and low-fat products. You go down any supermarket aisle and you'll see an abundance of low-fat products and low sugar and low fat, fat-free, should I say, products. But that's not always the best, okay? Certainly with fat-free ones or the low-fat ones, they're not always healthier because quite often they'll have a higher sugar and a higher salt content. And similarly with the low sugar ones, to try and maintain flavour, they may have a higher fat content. So with that respect, I think there's a little bit of education needed, a little bit of reading around. My personal opinion is tend to just go for the normal version and just keep an eye on the sugar and salt levels in there. Another factor that I often hear from clients is it's expensive to eat healthy. For those who are living in the UK watching this, I guess it depends. If you're going shopping at Waitrose or somewhere like that, then yeah, it is likely to be expensive. But it doesn't have to be, okay? There's a lot of low-cost supermarkets out there who've got really good products, so you can go and you can get a good selection of veg, meat, whatever, for a pretty good price. So it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. Busy lifestyles, again, we kind of touched on that on the previous slide, but it is a factor that we need to consider. And I think with a little bit of forward planning, it can take a lot of the hassle out of eating healthy and your daily meal prep. One of the best things that I can suggest is either get something like a slow cooker, and if you know what you're going to have in advance, then you just get up 10 minutes earlier, whack everything in it, and then turn it on, and you just leave it to cook. So when you come home, it's there, it's ready. You don't have to start worrying about what you're going to have. Have you got everything in? And particularly if you're rushing off again to the gym or taking the kids to sports, it's done, it's ready. And if you really need to, you can put it in a Tupperware pot and take it with you in your car, and the kids can eat it in the car. So a little bit of forward planning can get around that. Also, if you're competing certainly overseas, that can be challenging because you may not necessarily know what's available. But these days with the internet, you can go online, and most hotels tend to have the menus on there, or you can search out local restaurants and you can find out what they serve. So again, it just boils down to a little bit of forward planning. And then again, the indiscriminate use of supplements and sports foods. We've kind of mentioned this on the previous slides, so don't want to dwell on that too much. But again, try and adopt a food first approach, but supplements do have the place. There's no doubt in that. Okay, so just a little bit more info on point number 1, the first slide, about skipping meals. Quite often, and certainly I found this occurs in youth athletes quite a lot, okay, those around school age, sort of early teens, quite often get up and they don't like to eat breakfast, and it is a challenge for parents a lot of the time to get them to do that. But by skipping that breakfast, remember they've had an overnight fast, assuming they've had a good night's sleep of at least 7 hours, so potentially they've not eaten for maybe longer than that, 8 to 10 hours. So then if they're skipping breakfast, we can see that blood glucose levels. So if the red line here is the baseline blood glucose, that starts to dip and we start to get hypoglycemic. By the time we get to lunchtime, particularly in schools again, because the opportunity to feed during the school day are limited, they're very hungry and they tend to go for a big lunch. And again, when we're hungry, we tend to go for unhealthy options. Now, most schools these days tend to offer healthy foods, but there's also the usual chips, pizzas, burgers, things like that. And when we're hungry, we tend to gravitate to those foods, those processed foods more readily. And as I said before, there's a lot of research on that now. Problem with that, then we get a huge sugar rush, we then go hyperglycemic, okay? And the body has to work overtime to try and stabilize that blood glucose levels. We get a big release of insulin to try and stabilize the blood glucose and uptake it into the muscle and the liver. Come afternoon, mid-afternoon, we then crash because we've got this big hyperglycemic peak, and then the insulin's uptaking that out of the blood system, and we can get what's colloquially starting to be called as being hangry, okay, hungry and angry. And again, there's a lot of research from psychology that's coming out now that shows that hunger has a direct impact on our mood state, and traditionally they were thought to be very separate processes, but we now know that being hungry does have a direct impact on that mood state, cognitive function, irritability, and things like that. So we get this big crash, then we go back to tea time and we have our big meal again, okay? And traditionally we tend to have our bulk of our food at that evening meal. What we want to try and do though is split that out a little bit more. So I talked about having these more smaller meals. So by having that breakfast, straight away we can see there's no big dip in blood glucose levels, but similarly we don't get the same big spike, okay? So we have smallish breakfast, a reasonable rise in blood glucose levels, we get a little dip mid-morning, and by the time we get to lunchtime, we're ready to eat again. But we're not as hungry as we would be if we missed that breakfast, so we don't tend, or is less of a tendency to naturally go for the unhealthy options. But what happens if we add a snack in there? Okay, so here we can see I've added a snack in that mid-afternoon portion of the day, and we can see that has a dramatic effect on these blood glucose peaks and troughs, and they're much more stable. So if we could apply that to the morning as well, having a snack mid-morning and then again just before bed, we see much more stable blood glucose levels throughout the day, and therefore we're less hungry, we're more satiated, and tend to not snack on unhealthy options. Okay, in terms of food prep, we don't all have to be Gordon Ramsay to produce good, healthy food, but I think it does help if you can get some staples in your kitchen. So a good set of chopping boards. Ideally, I'd recommend some coloured chopping boards like the ones in the image here. So you can have one for veg, one for fruit, one for raw meat, one for cooked meat, etc. To cut down the chance of cross-contamination and getting ill. Good set of knives. Always good to have in there. Chopping knife, carving knife, paring knife, things like that. Set of scales. I'm not suggesting that you should be weighing all of your food, and I wouldn't recommend that. I think that is not necessarily a good habit. There's a risk there that we can get hung up on quantities and calories too much. Yes, we know that there are certain calorie ranges that we should be hitting for different activity levels, different exercise intensities, etc. But I don't think we should be getting too hung up on that. I think we should focus more on food quality than quantity, as long as you're eating the bare minimum. But a set of scales is useful for when we're cooking and baking, so that we know that we're getting the right combinations in there. Set of sealable containers, always useful. If you want to batch cook some foods, then we can use those to store them in the fridge for a couple of days. Again, going back to a bit of prior prep, if you know what you sit down and plan out what you're going to have for the week, then you could cook some chicken pieces and then store them in an airtight container in the fridge, and they'll last for 4 or 5 days. They'll be perfectly fine. Similar, freezer bags, good for that. And then 2 really useful pieces of equipment I would always recommend to any clients that I have is get a slow cooker and get a blender. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, certainly blenders wise, just a handheld blender will be fine. But again, they're great for making sauces, soups, smoothies, and then the slow cooker, as I said previously, just as long as you know what you're having, whack all the ingredients in, set it on, and off you go. When it comes to going shopping then, I would recommend always making a list. Okay, never go shopping when you're hungry or after a training session, something like that, because particularly after training, you've used a lot of energy up. You decide to go and do your weekly shop on the way back from the gym, and you're going around the aisles, and because you've used some energy up, you're a little bit hungry, and there's a tendency to pick at things, pick some snacks up, quick hit snacks, and less healthy options. So, and also just buy things you don't really need. So always go with a shopping list, okay? And that way there's a greater chance that you'll stick to just what you need, which is going to save money as well in the long run. Look at the sales section, okay? Meat, fish, etc. that's coming towards the end of its shelf life. You can get that, pick up some good bargains, stick it in the freezer, perfectly fine as long as you freeze it on the day of purchase. Similarly, when you defrost it, make sure you cook it on the day of defrosting. Don't stick it in the fridge and then decide to cook it a day or two later. Another one is don't get fooled by the end of aisle special offers. Okay, the supermarkets are very good at making them look like it's a real bargain, but actually quite often it works out more expensive. Ideally, what you should do is look at the cost per kilo, and most supermarkets will show that on the labels now. So look at the cost per kilo, do a quick bit of maths, and if it's cheaper, then just go and buy the normal ones. If it works out cheaper to buy the end of aisle ones, then so be it. Obviously go for those, but they aren't always the cheaper option. In terms of whether fresh is best, I get asked this quite frequently. Yes is the short answer, but also not always. Okay, particularly where fruit and vegetables particularly are concerned. Yes, fresh is great, but depending on the vegetables, sometimes frozen veg is perfectly fine because they're frozen rapidly at source, and therefore they don't degrade as quickly, and that helps to retain a lot more of the nutrients. So I think it largely depends on the vegetables, but generally speaking, yeah, fresh is better, but frozen veg is pretty good as well. If you've got the space, buy in bulk. Okay, that sometimes can work out cheaper. So if you're getting bags of rice or whatever, buying the bigger bags rather than the smaller ones can work out cheaper. And then lastly, use loyalty cards and vouchers if you've got them. Okay, use them. It can save quite a bit of money. Okay, when it comes to trying to work out what is healthy and what is not healthy, quite often that can be challenging and misleading in some cases, because not all food manufacturers adopt the same method of stating the nutrient content on their package. A lot of them use a traffic light system, which is great, but certainly in the UK, that's not a legal requirement to do that. What is a legal requirement, though, is the ingredients list, and they are always stated in list of highest quantity to lowest quantity. So even if you don't know whether it's particularly healthy, quick look at the ingredients list. And firstly, if sugars is one of the first ingredients on there, then you can be sure there's probably quite a lot of sugar in it, and it's probably better avoided. Secondly, if the ingredients list reads like a chemistry experiment, then again, I'd probably stay clear of that, or certainly limit your intake of it. With respect to sugars, there's a whole host of names, and we can see on this image here, there's 56 names alone just on this. Whichever way you dress it up, they are sugars. And they try to make it sound fancy, Florida crystals or mannitol or whatever. It's sugar. Whichever way you look at it, it's a form of sugar. So if any of those are on the ingredients list, and particularly if they're quite high up on that list of ingredients, then again, you should probably be limiting your intake of those. In terms of fats, we should try to avoid hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated and trans fats and saturated fats where possible. And here I've put a little traffic light system in for the good, the bad and the ugly. So the goods, the mono and the poly unsaturated fats, so things like avocado oil, canola oil, virgin olive oil, peanut, rapeseed oil, all good to have those, and we should have plenty of those in the diet. Grape oil, safflower, some soybean, things like that, not disastrous. We should have some of those in our diet, but eat in moderation. And then things like animal fats and shortenings, butter, dripping, palm oil, we should eat as few of those as possible. I put coconut oil in that list there. Still a huge amount of debate about whether coconut oil is good or bad or not. My personal opinion is ultimately it's still nearly 90+% saturated fat. Yes, it's better, it has a higher flash point, so it doesn't burn as easily under cooking, but it's still very high in saturated fat. And the evidence for its benefits are unequivocal. For every half a dozen studies that show, yes, it increases high density lipoproteins, you'll find another 6 studies that show that it doesn't. And some studies that have shown that it increases the good cholesterols have actually found that they're relatively inert, and actually depends on the source of those lipoproteins as well. So my personal opinion is, yes, have it, but eat in moderation. So when we're looking at those food labels, here's a guide to typical quantities that we should be looking for. So in terms of total fats, I'll always look at the 100 per 100 grams values aside from fiber. So per 100 grams for total fats, we should be looking at less than 3 grams per 100 grams. That's ideal. Moderate, 3.1 to 19.5 grams. Anything more than 20 grams per 100 grams, it's very high in total fats, and we should probably try and avoid those. Saturated fats, so in total, saturated fats shouldn't make up any more than 10% of our total daily calorie intake. So ideally per 100 grams, we're looking for foods that have less than 1.5 grams. Anything more than 5 grams per 100 grams, we should try and avoid. Similarly, sugars, less than 5 grams per 100 grams is good. Over 15 is bad, and we should avoid. Somewhere in the middle, we should have every now and again. For fiber, we want to look at the per serving, okay, rather than per 100 grams, it's the per serving, and we want to try and choose foods with more than 3 grams per serving. Ideally, our total daily fiber intake should be around 25 to 30 grams per day. Okay, just to finish up with then, I want to just get you to have a little think about how much sugar in a range of popular drinks. So all these are 500 ml bottles. So in your own time, you can pause the video, have a think about how much sugar or how many teaspoons of sugar are in each of these popular drinks. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a think about that. And you may well be surprised, you may not buy some of them, but some of you might be surprised at just how much sugar's in these. So out of those, the Ribena, the blackcurrant juice, was the lowest. That only had 1 teaspoon of sugar, so around 4 grams. I think one that catches a lot of people out is the water, the flavoured water. Flavoured waters have surprisingly more sugar in them than you would think, and this particular one here, this Volvic lemon and lime one, has nearly 20 grams of sugar per 500 ml bottle. Similarly, the iced tea has around the same, around 6, so around 24 grams. And then as we move through coffees, again, a lot of people underestimate how much sugar is in shop-bought coffees like your Starbucks, your Costas, places like that. But in a typical grande latte, then you're looking at nearly 64 grams of sugar, which is a huge amount of sugar. That's pretty much the whole daily intake for an adult female. And then similarly with bottles of Lucozade, they're a little bit higher still. One of the issues I have with drinks like Lucozade, they are often targeted at young children. The marketing is very clearly targeted at younger children with the brightly coloured packaging and things like that, and the endorsement by athletes. Okay, I think currently Lucozade have one that's endorsed by Lionel Messi, and I think that's a very bad marketing. Well, it's good marketing strategy from Lucosade's perspective, I suppose, but it's bad advertising in terms of promoting extremely sugar-dense drinks to young children. Okay, so that's a brief overview of some eating habits, some healthy eating habits you can try to put in place to promote good health, performance, and general well-being. Again, if you want any more information on this, you can contact me via my website at www.proformsportscience.co.uk, or you can get more information from my book, which is available on Amazon or via my Linktree link that you can see on screen. Hope you find that interesting. Go away and try and start to implement some of those. And thank you very much.